to our webinar on demystifying science-based targets. My name is Jess, and I'm the Research and Advocacy Lead at UN Global Compact Network Malaysia, as well as your host for today's session. We are very delighted to have more than 750 registered participants across 47 countries for this session, and together we'll learn from the experiences of those who have already set science-based targets within their companies as part of their climate strategy, and to translate the learnings from today into actions within the company. This webinar is the third session of a four-part SBTi Asia webinar series, jointly hosted by CDP Hong Kong, WWF Singapore, World Resources Institute Indonesia, Global Compact Network Singapore, and Global Compact Network Malaysia. So if you missed the previous sessions, please find the recordings on the Science-Based Targets YouTube channel. This session will also be recorded and shared with all attendees as well. A brief introduction of Global Compact Network Malaysia, in case you are unfamiliar with us. We are the official local network to the United Nations Global Compact, UNGC. UNGC is a strategic policy initiative which aims to mobilize a global movement of sustainable companies and stakeholders to advance broader societal goals. At Global Compact Network Malaysia, we support companies to do business responsibly by aligning their strategies and operations with the universal principles of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, and to take strategic actions to advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals with an emphasis on collaboration and innovation. We organize events, training programs, and provide tools and partnership opportunities to share best practices and emerging solutions. So for more information about our programs and how you can partner with us, please visit our website at www.ungcmalaysia.org. Okay, so what is the science-based target? The Paris Agreement in 2015 saw 195 of the world's governments commit to prevent dangerous climate change by limiting global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. This signaled an acceleration in the transition to a low-carbon economy. Many companies are already demonstrating they have the skills and expertise to make this a reality, but need ambitious emission reduction targets that ensure the transformational action they take is aligned with current climate science. Science-based targets are the key tools for the low-carbon transition. It provides companies with a clearly defined pathway based on climate science to future-proof their business growth and put them ahead of the game by specifying how much and how quickly they need in driving down their greenhouse gas emissions. Globally, there are now over Globally, there are now over 1,010 companies which have formally committed to setting science-based targets. More and more companies are also getting their targets validated and approved by the Science-Based Target Initiative, with now almost 530 companies with targets in place. And to date, 135 companies in Asia Pacific have committed to setting science-based targets. So I would like to take this opportunity today to encourage all of you to join the campaign, to show leadership, and to start setting science-based targets for your organization to achieve a low-carbon future. Okay, so let me take you through the agenda for today. We will first have a panel session where our speakers will share about their unique journey, challenges, and learning experiences of setting science-based targets for their company. There will be a short Q&A session after the panel discussion, and then there will be an industry sharing session by Stephen Moore, Head of Climate Action at GSMA, and then another round of Q&A session for you to ask questions. So let's start with our first panel discussion. So joining us today is a diverse group of panelists coming from the energy, property, and telecommunications sector who are based in Malaysia, Hong Kong, and Singapore. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for the panel, Ms. Flora Wang. Flora is the Director of Sustainability Investing for Fidelity International. Based in Hong Kong, she leads Fidelity International's engagement efforts with investee companies in Greater China on ESG issues. Prior to joining Fidelity International, she was the Head of Investment Stewardship for the Greater China markets in BlackRock, as well as the Head of China and Taiwan Research at Institutional Shareholder Services. We are excited to have her today as our moderator, representing the investor community, to facilitate a robust discussion on challenges and learnings that come with setting science-based targets. So throughout this session, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box, which is on the right side of your screen, and we'll try to address as many questions as we can in the 10-minute Q&A session after the discussion. We are hoping for no technical difficulties, but like many of you, we are dialing from home, so please bear with us if we have any connectivity issues, although I'm very sure we are all very used to working from home at this stage. Also, we will be uploading the recording after the webinar to SBTi's YouTube channel, so don't worry if you missed anything. So without further ado, let me pass our first session to Flora. Flora, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jess, for the introduction. I'm getting an echo.
You can mute yourself and unmute again.
Okay, let me try it again. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it better now? Can you hear me?
No echo now. Yeah.
Okay, so, all right. Sorry about that. Hopefully that's the only technical issue we have for today. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very pleased to have a panel of sustainability experts from 3 distinct sectors with us today to talk about their company's decarbonization journey and also to share with us the why and how behind their adoption of the science-based targets. Now, welcome to all of you. To start off, I'd like to invite each of you to give us a brief introduction to yourself and also to share with us one achievement that you feel most proud of in your company's decarbonization journey to date. Andrew, I'm going to start with you.
Thanks, Flora. Hi, I'm Andrew Bui, and I'm the Vice President for the Singtel Group's Corporate Sustainability, with particular focus and accountability for the Singapore and the Australian operations of our telecoms business. If there's one area I'm proud of, but it's just the beginning of a lot more hard work after that, is we were the first company in Asia outside of Japan to get approved our science-based targets in the September of 2017. And in a way, we've continued to advocate and champion for the cause, and also played a role to some extent in helping the whole mobile industry move towards a common pathway, which Steve Moore will share about later. Thank you, Flora.
Great. Erwin, would you like to go next?
Thank you so much, Flora. Can you hear me now? Thank you so much. My name is Irwan Man, Head of Division in WRI Energy. We are basically WRI Energy is a typically integrated energy developer as well as power utilities group. We have a clear vision of sustainable growth and prosperity for Sarawak, meeting the regional needs for renewable, reliable, and affordable energy. So I think we are among the first earliest 20 companies around the globe to sign the pledge for 1.5 degrees C. I think, yeah, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Raymond.
Hi, this is Raymond Yao. I'm the General Manager of the SWI Properties in charge of the technical services and sustainable development across our global portfolios. So before COVID, I need to travel to Chinese mainland and also to the US on a regular basis to oversee the projects and also existing portfolios. I think SWI Properties is still is the first property company on Chinese mainland having our science-based target approved by SBTi. We are really proud of that. But to achieve that, I think it is all along the fact that the company has rekindled our sustainable development strategy in 2016 and actually engaging every colleagues in the company to play a role in the corporate SD development. Without that, it will be extremely hard for us to convince our senior executive and the rest of the colleagues in the company to basically buy into the science-based target alongside with other strategies. So this is what I see the most proud achievement in the recent times, engaging the entire corporate into this new venture, SBT, as well as the SD new movement. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're going to come back to your point about how to engage with different functions within the firm, which is definitely a very important step in getting everything else to sort of flow downstream. But I guess even before that, Bruno, I'm going to stay with you for now. As you mentioned, Square had its science-based target validated and approved last November. But if we go back to the very beginning, how did you come across science-based targets and what made you commit to its adoption?
Well, to make it short, I joined Swire Properties in January 2016. Before that, I have been a consultant of an international engineering consultant in Hong Kong. But since 2016 January, and this is just a month after the COP21, in December 2015, we all know about the Paris Agreement. So it's one of the key drivers of me joining the company is to basically to review a lot of climate issues and climate action associated with that to see how the company should take it on board. So that is the start of basically looking into the science-based target as a kind of really logical way to assess how real estate sector, in particular, Swire Properties ourselves with global portfolio, have an impact in terms of carbon emission. So that started the journey of looking into or diving into the science-based target initiative recommendation. So it actually took us 3.5 years since the beginning of 2016, right after the Paris Agreement, to get our science-based target approved. Not because we only managed to work it out, the numbers and the commitment, but because of the journey required to get the entire corporate to buy into this relatively a new initiative, tall order, and review among ourselves the relative impact, both in terms of benefit and disbenefit and commitment associated with this science-based target. So it's only not until 3.5 years then we managed to get our boards of directors to endorse this science-based target. So it's quite a lengthy journey, but alongside, we actually did a tremendous work to engage, I would say, almost every colleague within the corporate, both the senior management, middle management, and also the frontline people to understand what it means. And but also I have to give the credit to another initiative going on concurrently during that period. That is we also established our new what we call the Sustainable Development Strategy. We call it SD 2030. That's is the main driver why SBT in the end proved to be acceptable to the corporate. It's because for the first time, we not only focusing on environmental aspect of sustainable development, but we also attempt to look at other important ingredients or pillars of SD. So under that SD 2030 strategy, we developed 5 pillars because we ourselves is a developer. So one of the key pillars of our business is to create exciting places as a developer. So places pillars become the core and the deliverable of all our SD or business deliverable. And alongside with that, we have a pillar called people. So we need to engage talented people to work in the company, and we need to engage retain the people. So to come up with a strategy how we actually attract the people to stay and so on. Alongside with that, we need to work with our business partners along the whole supply chain, either our office tenants, retail tenants, and also our design consultants designing new developments. With all this together, so we need to deliver exemplary environmental performances. So we got our environmental pillars, but we need finance to support us. So we got economic pillars. These 5 pillars work together integratedly, form the main pillars of our new SD 2030 strategy. That's how we come about it. So SBT become one of the key KPI under the environmental performance pillar. And with that in mind, we got other pillar support to enable us to engage colleagues within the company. And we also started to talk to our supply chain. We look at other aspects SBT requires to look at. For example, later on, I might talk about the scope 3 emission. So this is how we go about having eventually get our SBT endorsed after 3.5 years on the study desk provided by a consultant.
It sounds like Swear has a very holistic strategy, sustainability strategy, and environmental performance is absolutely a very critical component of it. And I guess one of the biggest appeal for science-based targets is the ability to have science to support whatever targets you come up with, which should help you to engage with your colleagues internally, because otherwise people might be questioning the legitimacy of the target. So I think having science to back up the targets you come up with is one of the benefits of SBT to help you to mobilize your colleagues internally. So that's definitely helpful to know. And also, I think it's helpful to know that it takes 3.5 years for a big company such as Square to actually get your targets approved. So it might be a good thing to start early. One takeaway for our audience. Andrew, you mentioned that the biggest or one of the biggest achievements for Singtel is actually becoming the first company in APAC ex-Japan to adopt science-based targets, which I have to say isn't really a surprise to me, given, as I understand, Singtel's decarbonization journey actually started even before the SBT initiative was established. Given you have the longest history with SBT, it'd be interesting to learn from you, how you have benefited or your climate strategy and actions have benefited from adoption of SBT.
Thanks, Flora. I think, like you mentioned, the journey started way before we got the approved targets. And like Raymond mentioned, it's a journey. But I would say it really started in earnest in 2014 when, for the first time as we did our formal stakeholder engagement and materiality review, the whole topic of climate change and climate risk appeared for the first time in the middle of the metrics. It was a high impact, high importance to our stakeholders. And of course, over the subsequent years in 2017, we saw it climb as a topic of importance to high impact, medium importance for our stakeholders. And recently, when we conducted our 2020 exercise, it's like top, right? So you could really see the journey from our stakeholders and what they saw as materiality, constantly moving up the impact and importance curve. But I would say in terms of what have been some of the benefits, I would say several. Now, like you mentioned, having a science-based methodology actually provides the structure, the framework, and the credibility. And I think one of the big benefits that created better momentum and focus within the organization is, realizing the quantum for which carbon reduction we had to undertake. Because before a science-based targets, whatever targets you set are always relative to what you think is important, whereas the science-based target actually set quite a significant quantum, right? At the time when we had set it was still against well below 2 degrees. IPCC hadn't issued the 1.5 degree target, but the quantum of reduction, which was about 42%, reduction between 2015 and 2030 was already considered quite significant. It did drive a lot of efforts within the business, initially very focused on energy efficiency. So just to give you an order of magnitude, the business undertook all forms of energy efficiencies, from cooling systems to, decommissioning of old network equipment to upgrades of network equipment. And we were able to achieve and abate about 70,000 tons of carbon through all these initiatives. Over a 5-year period, we were able to drive our carbon intensity, which we measure over the production unit of our telco business, which is capacity. We were able to improve that energy intensity and carbon intensity by over 70%. So that's one example where it benefited in driving the business towards energy efficiency initiatives. Other areas which are still nascent, early days, but we're now looking at things like renewable energy. And this year, in March, Singapore, we commissioned Singapore's largest single roof solar platform, solar renewable energy system. That will be a second example where it's now driving a lot more investigation into renewable energy, because we realize even for all the energy efficiencies, we need now renewable energy to really have the quantum reduction of the carbon footprint. Other examples, which again sort of relates to what Steve will speak about later, because there was a common methodology, we could actually do a lot more advocacy and collaboration, because I think in this area of carbon reduction, one of the biggest benefits we found is getting all our relevant stakeholders on the same journey, and having a common global methodology actually fosters that collaboration. In our case, a major initiative was really through the GCMY and a common pathway, and now we're looking at collaborating in the area of scope 3 reduction with the supply chain. You can't achieve that as a single company. It's got to be a collaborative effort. If there's one last benefit we are doing now, we've seen the use of that information and the carbon into our TCFD analysis, which is really now looking at the financial risk related to climate. And, when you look at things like transition risk, you actually have to have a very good fundamental understanding of things like your current carbon footprint, your current future trajectory, because some of the transition risks are really in the materiality of things like carbon taxes or investments to achieve a low carbon position. So actually there are multiple benefits just having a framework and a carbon target set through a science methodology.
That's really interesting. I think oftentimes when we think about how a company could benefit from the adoption of science-based targets, we focus on the internal benefits, which is essentially mentioned on guiding our climate actions in delivering the specific progress around energy efficiency, which could translate into financial benefits as well. But what I find even more interesting, which is something I haven't really thought about before, is this external benefits, how having this common methodology could really drive collaboration between companies within sector or even across sector, which is super important for tackling an issue such as climate change, which is truly universal. So that's very interesting. Thank you. Erwin, I'm gonna move to you. We know that Sarawak Energy managed a very impressive transformation in the past decade. I think from having around 8% of your power generation capacity in fossil fuel to today's almost 80% in renewable energies, all without the adoption of science-based targets. So my question for you is actually, why do you even bother to adopt it today? Why do you think it's important for you to adopt science-based targets for your carbon reduction journey ahead?
Journey. So for Andrew mentioned about takes them 3 years to approve the science-based targets. I think that's always a question to us, how long it takes for us to get the approved SBT. Okay, in terms of Sarawak Energy Journey, we start off with the establishment of Sarawak Corridor of Renewable Energy. It is a state strategic agenda to harness the renewable energy potential in Sarawak to propel state economic development. By having all this, by increasing our renewable energy generation mix in our energy, it's basically significantly reduce our dependency on fossil fuel and other non-renewable energy sources. As a result, it significantly reduced our grid emission intensity by 76% as compared to 2009. Our grid emission now is well below 2 degrees C targets of Paris Agreement. This shows that the shift to renewable energy is a foundation toward transition to low carbon economy in long term. So the next question is, what's next? Since the earlier focus was toward shifting of our renewable energy, our generation toward renewable energy, what are the opportunities beyond generation or supply side that are able to accelerate climate action as well as business growth? We know that, everyone knows that climate change is one of the biggest risks faced by the global as of now. We recognize as well climate change is also risk to us in our operation, and it will have a significant impact in the long run. The other question we need to ask ourselves is how resilient we are in terms of managing climate issues. Right? Because as a power utilities and developer, we are one of the key foundation to economic growth in any countries. Utilities is one of the foundation. We believe that we are able to make a real change by having a strategic decision. So that's why Sarawak Energy, when we adopt to SBT, it is a sensible decision for power utilities to address the opportunity as well as risks. So basically, it set a long-term goal for us that drives us as a corporate to embark into greenhouse gas emission reduction targets within the corporation, not only within the corporation, but also within our value chain or supply chain. Again, it is a journey in creating a sustainable business model for us. Yeah.
It sounds like the question should not really be, why do you need to adopt it? The question should be, why not? It's a very useful tool. We should all make good use of it. Okay. Now, I think hopefully our clients have really laid out good, compelling reasons about why SBT is quite a useful tool for any company that is committed to doing its part in the world low carbon transition in a way that is aligned with Paris Agreement. Erwin, given you are the latest member to the club, I think your memory is probably relatively most fresh when it comes to getting internal buy-in, especially from senior management and the board. We'll be very interested to learn from you about how you go about getting that internal buy-in. I'm sure the audience will be very keen to hear from you any tips, in your efforts to get their support.
Yeah. Thank you again, Fern. So it's all about managing through data. So it is very important to develop a sound and practical business case on SBTi and how it's able to address the risks at the same time offer an opportunity. It must have clear linkages with your corporate vision, missions, as well as our inspiration to become a sustainable corporation, for example. So as an example, how these initiatives support continuous improvement, process improvement, also linked to agile mindset and culture, ultimately improve the corporation efficiency as well as resilient during volatile and uncertainty global business environment now, where we are in now in COVID-19. So it's all about being efficient. If we're able to link this to climate change action, so all of these activities become more efficient, become more resilient. It's all about reducing our impact on climate change and having a new process in place so that every process in the company will be less carbon intensive. Okay, one key point, important point that I would like to share or highlight here is that it's very important as a beginner for us how we get the buy-in. I think to have a right operation data in relation to climate change. Okay, and by having this data, we're able to analyze the trend, able to link it to the corporation initiative, corporation vision and mission, and so on. So yeah, it's very important. Accurate data from our real operation data, as well as supported by external data, will be a very valuable input to our analysis in developing a business case in relation to climate change. I think this is what I can share, the key points that in getting the buy-in from the management, not only from the management, but also other functions or colleagues within the company.
So having data and being able to quantify the impacts of climate change, both in terms of transition risk and physical risk, is one of the key steps in getting the support from management and the board, and also the support of other functions as well.
Yeah.
Great. Now, I guess after we obtain the support from management and the board, the natural next step would be, getting or actually setting the targets. And with that, I'm going to go to Andrew. Again, given Singtel is the first company in APAC and Japan to adopt science-based targets, I would imagine at the time you didn't really have much of a reference to guide your target setting. So how did you come up with the targets? Did you do it all by yourself, or you used external consultants? How are these consultants helpful in setting the targets?
Thanks, Flora. Actually, on the site, it's quite interesting. We went straight to seek approvals, and the management committee of Singtel saw it for the first time. We probably didn't know what we didn't know in terms of managing our stakeholders, but we were fortunate to be able to get all the approvals at first go. Like Awan mentioned, it's actually a journey. When I mentioned in 2014, when we first identified the issue of the climate risk, at that time was when the operation really went into a lot more detail to try and understand the carbon footprint. So that was really the basis of it. By understanding the carbon footprint, the drivers from all across the business, that's really the first step. Then as we approached the SBTi, at that time, it was quite new, and it was quite interesting. In Asia, we couldn't find any third parties or even consultants who were familiar with the topic and the methodology. We ended up through RFP bringing two consultants together. One was a local consultant in Australia that helped us to undertake a life cycle assessment of our whole business and operations, the environmental life cycle assessment. That was quite valuable in helping us understand our carbon footprint in our value chain. And then we tied them up with a European consultant who worked very closely with SBTi in the formulation of the methodology, as well as had undertaken the exercise for a couple of the early European companies who had set the targets. So that was one. I think the other element that helped quite significantly was also we had quite a lot of audited data of our carbon footprint, so that gave assurance to management and the board. And also, as I mentioned earlier, we had a good track record by that time of a lot of energy efficiency initiatives. So even though at that time we weren't yet talking about renewable energy, there was that sense of confidence that we were at least able to undertake, track, and measure how we could reduce carbon at that time through internal efforts. One of the things we had to do, because we were very early, is we didn't have any sector pathway guidelines at that point in time. SBTi hadn't yet developed anything for the telco industry. So we had to use proxy sectors that had a bit more information. Like we had to use construction sector, for which there was a lot more information. We had to use the SBTi guidelines for the electronics industry and a few other sectors. And by sort of looking at the constituent components of our business and the value chain, we're able to proxy up the carbon targets against where our current, at the time, the carbon footprint was. And we're quite fortunate with a bit of clarifications. We actually got through SBTi's approval in the first round. So we didn't go through a commitment, then target setting phase. We probably didn't know what we didn't know and went straight into a target approval. Looking back, it's a bit crazy. How
long did it take you? No, that's super impressive. How long did it take you to get your targets approved?
We started the investigation in late 2016, started the work, I recall, with the external party about February to March of 2017. And by July, we were already submitting targets for approval, and by September, we got it September of 2017 from SBTi. So it wasn't too long drawn, difficult a process. There were quite a lot of normal inquiries into the methodology, the data that you have, and so forth. But I think, again, because we've done quite a lot of the pre-work, it did help quite significantly. So it's not one you can rush. And as my colleagues mentioned, the more preparation, groundwork, tracking of your current carbon that you can do, the better it helps you in that process.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not a competition, and every company is in a slightly different situation. And another, I think, takeaway from what you just described for me is you actually engaged two consultants. Because oftentimes when we think about consultants, I have this impression that they are able to deliver everything that we would like them to do. But I think in the area of climate change, this may not necessarily be the case. And sometimes we just need to, engage multiple consultants to help us on different areas. But hopefully, now we are 5 years into the journey, and I'm sure CDP and the Science-Based Target Initiative is able to provide more resources and support for companies who are just starting out on this journey. So hopefully it won't be as long or as costly for the new members who are interested. Great. Now, Raymond, coming back to you, I think it's all well and good that we have the targets, but how do we actually deliver the targets? I think in your case, you have set carbon reduction targets for Scope 1 and 2, as well as Scope 3 emissions. Scope 1 and 2 are relatively more in our control, but what about Scope 3 emissions? I think Swire not only have Scope 3 reduction targets, you actually further specify reduction targets for leased assets and capital goods. So how do you actually influence the players in your upstream and downstream to work with you and achieve your targets?
Thank you for the question. I'd just like to highlight the fact that it took, despite the fact that it took us 3.5 years from firstly come across the science-based target in early 2016 and eventually get our science-based target approved over a 3.5 years journey. Over this time, we actually have done a lot of reality check and assessment how we could possibly achieve it. So by the time we get our science-based target submitted, we basically got a fair bit of understanding how we shall achieve it by the midterm target and ultimately by 2030. So we set our midterm target is 2025. So in other words, for a company like Swire, I won't say we are very conservative, but we to the least we have to convince to the senior executive that this is a possible way of achieving such tall order and how we shall go about it. So therefore, the 3.5 years journey has actually took us a lot of time diving into details, working out strategy, working with each of our portfolios across in Chinese mainland and Hong Kong to basically communicate with them how we could possibly achieve it in the end before, I have to say, getting the endorsement from the senior executive. Because one of the very fundamental questions the senior executive, the board will ask us, how are you going to achieve it? And what are the possible costs associated with it? And what would be the strategy? So before getting the endorsement. So unlike many others that you might be getting the senior executive buy into this aspiration target and you think about how to go about it. From us, it's the other way around. Basically, at the time when we seek for the final endorsement, we got basically a lot of the nitty-gritty sorted out and a lot of engagement already taken place and got buy-in. And then it is just getting the right time to get it presented to the board for the final endorsement and seeking the SBTi and acceptance and so on. So that's a lot of these are alluding to the fact that Swire Properties has at least have a journey of at least about 2 decades of energy savings And with our first initial targets on energy saving set out in 2010 for the target to be achieved by the end of this year, 2020. So we all along the past 10 or 15 years, we already got a energy saving target. Alongside with that, we install smart meters, probably not smart meters, but energy meters in basically all our portfolios across in China and Hong Kong. And then we got basically, like Owen said, we understand exactly how our portfolio perform in terms of energy consumption. So with that in mind, we actually work out a energy reduction trajectory and predict what more can it be done. Because quite a bit of our asset has been around for quite some time. For example, our very important Pacific Place development has been around for 30 years. But people say it's still a very brand new sort of development. That's because we upkeep it utmost as much as we could. But for that development, we install a lot of energy meters, understanding exactly how energy is being consumed. So with that in mind, we were able to work out a kind of strategy, at least for the midterm target 2025, which is in line with the Paris Agreement, at least about 2-degree trajectory reduction. So that's how we control it. And in respect of the scope 3, the question Flora asked me earlier, despite the fact that our initial SBTi commitment doesn't necessarily require us to have a really stringent commitment in terms of scope 3 reduction. However, we find it is absolutely essential and necessary to engage our supply chain to do something similar along this line. So we commission a materiality assessment by consultant first to look at among all these scope 3 sort of carbon emission subjects, which are the most material to our business, the real estate sector, with our global portfolio. We find the capital goods as well as the downstream lease asset constitute majority of our scope 3 carbon emission. So therefore, we decided we got to set out targets to address this particular 2 areas. Capital goods means new development in the pipeline, and downstream lease asset is our office and retail tenants, right? So their scope 2 emission, as far as our tenants, basically form our scope 3. So if we can work closer together with our tenants to reduce their scope 2 energy consumption or carbon emission, that will enable us to achieve the scope 3 reduction. So therefore, we work out tenant engagement exercise, various kinds. For example, we have free energy audits to our retail tenants as well as our office tenants, has been around for at least about 5 or 6 years already. 2 years ago, we rolled out initiatives such as a green kitchen initiative. So engaging our F&B tenants, particularly at times when there are more F&B in our retail mall, then addressing the restaurants, the kitchen, which are the big energy spender, then that would help to reduce their energy consumption and then our scope 3. So now we got over 13 main brand F&B outlets in our in restaurants in our Chinese mainland portfolio buying into this scheme. When they refurbish their kitchen, they took on board our checklist and recommendation. They sourced, for example, heat recovery kitchen equipment, all kinds of devices, for example, water-saving devices and so on. Follow exactly our recommendation. Then in return, we gave them a recognition, not necessarily financially, but a recognition from Swire Properties that you have actually retrofit or designed or install a green kitchen within your premises. And that evaluation actually helped to promote the image as well as ours. And we have independent people coming here to basically, our technical staff and my department colleagues basically going down to the kitchen to inspect the installation, check out the equipment plates, check out the energy consumption, and so on and so forth, and work out correspondingly whether it complies with our recommendation. So similarly, in Hong Kong, we have a lot of these buying into this. Yes?
So it sounds like, sorry for interrupting you, but it sounds like collaboration with your tenants is definitely a key step, and you are giving them some incentives. At the moment, no financial incentives, but you're giving them recognition that could help them to improve their own image as well as yours, which is definitely, proven to be quite effective as well. And going back to your earlier comments on how you, as you went set out to set your targets, you also took a more conservative approach in coming up with set of steps to make sure or be sufficiently confident that you're able to deliver those targets. Whereas the other approach could just be, let's go ahead and set targets and then figure out how we deliver those targets later on, which sounds like something Andrew did at Singtel, as they just went to their board and got their approval and blessing at first go. But Andrew, I think going back to you, once you've obtained that approval, how do you actually mobilize your colleagues from other departments to get them to work with you to deliver that goal? I think that actually ties in with one of the questions we're getting from the audience, which is essentially, how do you, or whether you embed sustainability performance in your KPIs to incentivize your senior executives as well as your, I think, middle management team to help you to achieve your goal.
Okay. I think, Flora, the engagement, I suppose two lenses. When we set the targets and, when the business looks at the energy efficiencies, many of them actually take those as guides, and because they know they are part of the business well, a lot of the energy efficiency initiatives actually come organically from the business. But again, having a target actually provides that quantum and the guideline. But I'll say now that we are looking at the more aggressive pathways for reduction, especially as we're investigating more extensive renewable energy, that is one where we have had to engage many different stakeholders. And in fact, we have a working subcommittee that has people from networks to our data center, to our energy purchasers, to property, to our sustainability team, to finance team. It's a very cross-functional team, for the simple reason that we're all on the learning journey in terms of some of the nuances of renewable energy, the structure of PPAs and renewable energy certs and things like that. So as opposed to it just being a solo effort by the sustainability team, we found it most effective to actually take it collectively and collaboratively, because there are a lot of joint learning that we're actually going through. In a place like Singapore, for example, where there's going to be very limited renewable energy supply, and not many companies have done it at scale, nor is there a scale of supply. We felt we had to take it quite collectively, and it can't be driven by just individual functions within the business unit. To your question on things like the KPIs and the targets, I suppose it helped that as a company process and policy, the moment we identify a material ESG issue, our process of governance requires us to have the issue approved by the board. The board expects us to set a target, a midterm target, but in the context of carbon, we actually set short-term, midterm, long-term targets. The board approves those targets, and we actually then would do disclosures of those targets as well as it gets audited. So I suppose maybe it was that discipline and the process that automatically converts it into a target setting mode. But when it comes into the issue of incentives, in fact, this year, just recently, a couple of months ago, we haven't announced this publicly in any detail, but the board has actually approved a set of KPIs, midterm KPIs, that tie to our long-term incentives, our share incentives of all the top management of the company. And whereas in the past, the KPIs were sort of relevant to each business unit, this set of KPIs are shared KPIs across, 5 different ESG metrics for all top management collectively. So it becomes a sort of a joint accountability, and there's a certain weightage of that ESG KPIs relative to other financial type and business performance KPIs. So it sort of translates finally into what gets measured gets done in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess coming from an investor perspective, one indicator we look for when we assess the sustainability performance of a company, especially on a forward-looking basis, is to see if sustainability performance is embedded in senior management KPIs, because that level of incentive provides a really good assurance to outsiders that the company is really serious about these ambitious goals they're setting. One more question for you, Andrew, actually, because earlier on you mentioned at the time when you were setting the targets, you didn't have a lot of reference. You didn't even have a sectoral pathway, so you actually had to use proxy. But later on, when you have, I guess, more sectorial guidance, did you actually have to recalibrate your targets from those approximation?
Yes. So there's a need to do a recalibration. For us, there were two drivers. One was we did it initially against well below 2 degrees, and of course, subsequently, we have adopted the 1.5 degree ambition and a net zero ambition. And then, of course, the other second factor is the development of the GSMA pathways and guidelines, right? So this actually requires us to undertake an update in our context probably by about 2022 to be able to do that update. So we know what the update is needed to be done. And of course, right now, a lot of the focus is really focused more on the initiatives to reduce the carbon, because we do expect in 1-2 years' time, there might be new guidance, even more aggressive. So rather than constantly keep updating, we know what the number is internally as a shadow target. We will do that formally when it gets closer to 2022. But the answer is yes, you actually would have to update. And I think there was a comment there that at the minimum, you review every year, which we do. And then at the minimum, you do a formal update no later than 5 years.
I see. That's really very helpful practical tips. In interest of time, I think I'm going to close with one question for all the panelists. It's a very interesting question, actually. So for a company that just starts to venture into their sustainability journey, should science-based targets set at the beginning of the journey or after the company has established a more comprehensive sustainability strategy? As Raymond, you talked about what Square did, when you started to setting your targets. So maybe I'll start with you, Raymond. For a company that's really just starting on their sustainability journey, should they develop a comprehensive strategy before adopting science-based targets, or they could just go ahead and adopt the science-based targets?
Well, I would only comment based on my experience, because the company has been doing a lot of energy saving strategy, but unfortunately, it has always seemed to be the job, for example, of my department. So without a comprehensive strategy, hardly I could think that I can engage majority of the colleagues within the corporate to enter into this journey, right? To be seen to be constructive, and they are part of it. So therefore, we developed a relatively new strategy since 2016. Is purely to address how we can involve the rest of the company to go along this journey, right? And therefore, my take is that you've got to involve basically as many people as possible. And even though they play a slightly different role or lesser role, but they still have a role to play. So our result of this revised SE strategy actually enable us to do it. Now, for example, within the corporate, my marketing colleagues actually took up a lot of responsibility in sharing the message, both externally, internally, and my frontline people actually ask us for measures that they can engage in order to save more energy and so on. So that's my experience. Otherwise, we could easily get in the situation that it is your department responsibility to reduce energy and do it. Nothing to do with the rest, right? That's one take. But whether you need to really, but adopting the science-based target is really good because it can immediately tells you that your decarbonization efforts are in line with the climate science, with the science approach. But you need to ask yourself how you shall work to achieve it. So therefore, you need to do a really reality check. If I got a consultant helping me to devise a science-based target, midterm target, and ultimate target, then you also need a consultant, might be a different consultant, to help you to review your business and how you could possibly achieve it. Right. So I think it's always good to start off with science-based target, but do a reality check how you can go about it.
So strategy first, but science-based target shouldn't come too late either. Erwin, what's your take?
Yeah. Pardon?
Erwin, are you with us?
Okay, yeah. Okay, to me, I would like to opt for something in the middle. Of course, we can't be doing SBT without knowing where we are in terms of reality, where the performance, the data, and so on. And to the other extreme, whether we need to have a comprehensive strategy first, I think it will take time. So I think I will be in the middle. For us, I think it's important for us to really understand what's material to us and how it's going to support our business plan, our future vision, and so on. So how we create values. I think and then start drilling down to the data, and then that will, of course, it tie up to materiality, which one is more important to us, and start to drill down to the data requirements, and then from there we try to understand how big is this like. And then from there we can coming out with strategy that really addressing all the risks and opportunity in terms of climate change. Of course, in doing so, we need to really engage with other stakeholders. Yeah, I agree with Raymond. We need to engage with our operation guys, for example, try to understand from their perspective why this is important and how we can link this to a bigger agenda or bigger strategy or bigger targets. Once we have that, then I think we have a good case or good business case for us to get the management buy-in. I think that's my take on that.
I think that makes sense, especially given you are a power generation company. Climate change is probably 80% of your sustainability issue. So setting SBT first actually help you to develop a comprehensive sustainability strategy. Great. Now, Andrew, I'm going to give you the opportunity to close our session with your answer.
Well, I think sustainability and climate is a topic that's very integrated, right? So I think you just cannot go simply and straight into setting carbon targets, because to me, carbon targets is a component of a much larger equation, right? It relates to climate risk, it relates to, in our case, business continuity, it relates to things around how we need to also build resilience and adaptation in our infrastructure. It also relates to topics like the impacts to community of natural disasters and global warming and things like that, right? So when you can establish the holistic view of how all these things are interdependent, I think it actually reinforces the specific actions that you need to take. So for us, when we look at a topic like climate change, we look at everything from building resilience in our infrastructure, adaptation. Of course, we look at reducing the carbon, which is a feeder to global warming, but we also look at how we need to influence government policy for infrastructure, because it's not just telco infrastructure, it's also the other dependent infrastructure like transport or power, for which resilience is very important during times of natural disasters or weather or climatic disasters relating to climate change. And we also undertake activities that support the community, the social impact during times of climatic-related disasters, right? So the more I think you can weave a totality of a narrative, and there's more raison d'etre for the company as to the why this is important, even if one of the elements is setting a target for carbon, I think you have more likely chances of success within the broader organization. So I'll say very consistent with what Raymond and Erwan have mentioned, but obviously you also need the bottom up, which you need all the data, the tracking, and what are you going to do to reduce that. So you can't run away from the bottom up as well.
I feel like the conclusion should be you should try as much as you can to do the two things at the same time.
Do both.
Yeah, great. I think on that, I'm going to wrap up the panel session. Once again, a big thank you to all my panelists for sharing your time and the insights. I'm sure our audience is able to find something useful to walk away with. With that, back to you, Jess.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Flora, and our distinguished panelists, Erwan, Raymond, and Andrew, for sharing your experiences and insights of your science-based target journey. So we very much appreciate your participation, and we hope that all of you who are listening in to this session will come away with a clearer understanding of the science-based targets and are more motivated in setting these targets within your climate strategy to achieve a low-carbon future for all. So in the interest of time, we would have to move on to the next session. Control. Okay. Yeah. So we have Stephen with us to share about climate action on an industry level, as well as the ambitious targets set by the telecom sector to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Stephen is responsible for the Climate Action Program at the GSMA, the Mobile Industry Association. The association unites more than 750 mobile operators with almost 400 companies in the broader mobile ecosystem. Stephen is passionate about sustainable development, and he has worked on climate action for the past 13 years in Deloitte and British Telecom. Once again, feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A box for Stephen, and we'll try to address as many questions as we can in the 5-minute Q&A session after his sharing. So very excited to hear from you. Stephen, over to you, and now you will have the right to control your flight.
Thank you very much, Jess, and good morning from London. Good afternoon from where you are. It's a slightly rainy morning here in London. That probably won't surprise you. So let's see if this works. Let's click. Great, and it does. Fantastic. And there's no echo, which is even better. So thanks everyone. I'm going to be talking about the climate action program that we have here at the GSMA in the context of all the fantastic questions and answers and insights that you have already gotten from the panel this morning. So let's kick off, and I'll just give you a little bit of background on who the GSMA is in case you don't know. So we are the Mobile Industry Association, so we represent more than 750 mobile operators globally, as well as more than 400 companies in the broader mobile ecosystem. And we work to deliver a regulatory environment that creates value for consumers. And so we engage quite regularly with ministries of telecoms, telecom regulatory authorities, and other international and NGOs, non-governmental organizations. In a normal year, we would be bringing together many people from across the world and in different regions to events to bring the industry together, our largest one being in Barcelona, which normally takes place in February. Obviously, that's been a little bit different this year, so we've moved, as everyone else has, everything online. So we're still bringing the industry together in kind of global and regional events. I just move on to the next slide, and I wanted to give, before talking about what we do around climate action in the mobile industry, I wanted to give some context around the electricity use and carbon emissions of the ICT sector. And this sort of reference is actually something that Andrew talked about earlier, which is our industry approach to how we address this. So first of all, ICT represents about 4% of global electricity use, with entertainment and media representing a further 3%. And in terms of the carbon emissions of the ICT sector, that's the graph on the right-hand side. ICT represents about 1.4% of global carbon emissions, and it's split into the different sections that you can see on the graph. So for communications networks, we've got fixed networks, 8%, mobile network 16%, and then enterprise networks. So that's just over a quarter. And then you have data centers representing about a fifth. But then also what's very important to consider is the manufacture of devices, which represents just over a quarter, and also when they're in use. And I highlight those areas, operations, supply chain, and customers, because it's important to consider when you're looking at how you reduce carbon emissions, not only in your own operations, but throughout the value chain. So if we move on, what was the original reason for us starting to take action on this? And this is really a recognition by the mobile industry, in particular the board of the GSMA, that climate change is real, climate change is happening, and climate change is an emergency that we need to tackle at speed. So last year in February 2019, the GSMA board declared that we will work on a path to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and align our climate targets accordingly. And why did we choose net zero by 2050 at the latest? Well, that is aligned to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It's aligned to the science-based targets, so that we seek to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees by the end of this century. Now, in order to achieve this, we looked at focusing on three things. So the first one was around getting members to disclose their climate risks, so their carbon emissions. The second area was around helping to develop the pathway to zero emissions. So how are we going to get to net zero by 2050? And the third area is actually setting targets. So ideally setting targets that are science-based targets. So how have we done on these things? Well, first of all, I'll talk about climate disclosure actually, and in particular CDP reporting, which is something that we recommended to our members to do. So you can't obviously manage what you don't measure, and that was an important first step to talk to our members about mobile operators across the globe. Some of them, such as Singtel and Andrew, were well down this path and have been measuring and managing their carbon emissions for a number of years. But actually, many mobile operators, this was something completely new. So we actually helped them with this, working with CDP, so that they could understand why it was important. We actually created a climate handbook for mobile operators, specifically explaining carbon emissions and climate reporting, what the different scopes of emissions were, and which ones they should be focusing on as a mobile operator. What some of the risks and opportunities that are created by climate change, starting to think about a plan of action as well for going forward. So for the last CDP, we actually had more than 50 operators representing about 2/3 of global mobile connections reported to CDP, which is a big jump, and obviously helps put us on a footing to begin to manage the emissions of the sector much better. I also wanted to mention TCFD and the TCFD framework. So the TCFD, this is the task force on climate-related financial disclosures, and this is important because it's very much aligned to CDP. And the reason this is important is because it helps to embed an understanding of climate risks and opportunities within your business, which is really key to making sure that especially your leadership of your organization, but also all the way through your organization, has an understanding of why it's important for you to take action, what will happen if you don't take action on reducing your climate risk, but also what the business opportunities are presented in this space. And that's particularly important. I'll talk about this a bit more later, for ICT companies and for mobile companies as well. So we've been working to highlight both CDP reporting and using the TCFD framework to our members, because we think they're complementary and they help set them on a good path. So how have we done so far as an industry on climate action? As I mentioned before, we had good disclosure to CDP last year. We're obviously sort of crunching through the numbers for CDP this year, which is just those last month, a couple of months ago, and we're hoping that will be even better. As Andrew mentioned before, this mobile industry pathway to net zero emissions. So this is something that we came together with the ITU, so the UN body for ICT, GESI, the Global E-Sustainability Initiative in Europe, and the Science Based Targets Initiative. And it was a lot of number crunching. We were actually the first sector to voluntarily put ourselves forward to SBTi to calculate this. But we calculated and agreed a pathway for the ICT sector to net zero emissions by 2050. And this was especially useful because it is for not only mobile, but also for fixed line and for data center operators and for enterprise networks as well. And that's useful because although we represent mobile operators, most of our members actually also have either fixed line or data center operators or enterprise networks as well. In terms of target setting, and in particular science-based targets, so we have 29 operators representing 30% of global connections that are committed to or set science-based targets. And actually, those SBT operators that I've put here are more than 50% of industry revenue. So we have just over half of the industry by revenue that could set a science-based target that is aligned to the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And who are the operators that we work with globally? So we work with them, you can see here on the screen, they're all over the globe, and we work them through the Climate Action Task Force. So this is something that was set up so that we would have a forum to engage directly with operators on climate issues. And we do several things as part of this task force. So one of the things is to encourage leadership in this space. So we take those companies that are particularly leading, Singtel being an example, to show the route forward for companies that maybe haven't set targets yet, to inspire and encourage other companies to follow suit. We share best practice. So there's a lot of sharing of how companies have set their targets, how they're reducing their carbon emissions amongst this group. We bring the industry together, normally face to face, but virtually at the moment. And we also help to set policy frameworks for how we're going to achieve net zero emissions, which is something that I'll mention in a bit more detail. So on the right-hand side, you can see that we've got just over half the industry aligned to the Paris Agreement. We've actually got just over a quarter of the industry aligned to net zero targets, which is obviously fantastic as well. And we know that actually quite a lot of operators are crunching the figures on their carbon reduction targets, and we expect that number to increase over the coming months into next year. So I mentioned that this climate policy framework, and this is something that we developed over the summer and was really important actually so we could understand what to focus on to help achieve science-based targets. And we wanted to highlight the action that the industry was already taking, but also look at the areas that we had to continue to take action on to achieve SBTs. So you can see here, this is energy efficiency is really important to us. Renewable energy is going to be a significant way we can decarbonize. We can also, equipment sustainability, we can also help other sectors decarbonize as well. And that's what we talk about on the digitization, reducing emissions. So we can use digital technologies to make our own businesses more efficient, but we can also use it to help other businesses more efficient as well. And finally, adapting to a changing climate. That is something that all of us will have to do. As infrastructure operators, we're going to be perhaps even more susceptible than other sections of society in order to do that. So we went through a consultation, and this is now published, and you can see it on gsma.com. So how else have we been supporting operators in setting SBTs? Energy efficiency, I mentioned before, is a big one. So looking at things like artificial intelligence for energy. We had a recent project on this where operators could share what they're doing, and we're looking to do a deep dive research project from January. We're also looking at doing a benchmarking exercise. So this is looking at how operators' networks compare between different countries. So they can begin to understand how their network might be more or less energy efficient than their peers. We've got 7 operators on board. 3 of those actually have global operations, and we're looking to do that from January next year. I mentioned renewable energy. This is probably the quickest, not always the easiest, but definitely one of the fastest ways to reduce carbon emissions across our sector. We've worked quite closely with the RE 100, the Global Campaign. Quite a number of the members of the task force are members of the RE 100. They have lots of useful resources and also engage in advocacy to encourage countries to create energy markets that support renewables. We've also recently done a research report which is looking at renewable energy from mobile towers. So this is in countries where there either is no electricity grid or there is intermittent access to renewable energy. And in those situations, usually you would use diesel generators, which is obviously quite polluting, both in carbon terms and air pollution as well. So we've looked at what are the more sustainable alternatives using renewable energy. Really detailed reports using a number of kind of showcase countries, and we will be doing a webinar on that actually to explain the results later this month. So supply chain sustainability has also been mentioned, and this is, as you see from the graph that I mentioned at the beginning, this is very significant for us as an industry. There's a few different things that we're doing in this space. One is around trying to get some better understanding of our supply chain emissions by encouraging our suppliers to disclose to CDP. We also engage with an organisation called JAC, which is Joint Audit Cooperation. So that organisation audits common suppliers across the industry. We're working with them on helping those suppliers understand their carbon emissions, and also then helping some of them set science-based targets, those that are more advanced. There's a new initiative looking at an eco-rating for handsets, which a number of the operators have come together to create. So we're helping promote that amongst the task force. And e-waste obviously is a big issue everywhere in the world, in particular in developing countries. So we've got some analysis on e-waste, on specific local regulations, and how operators can better manage their e-waste. I mentioned before that we can help reduce carbon emissions in other sectors. And this is something we call enabling carbon reduction. We did a report called the Enablement Effect. And I think this is useful to highlight because we want to help other sectors decarbonise. We want to help other sectors achieve their science-based targets. And what the report showed was that we can actually help greenhouse gas savings 10 times the emissions of our own sector. And you can see the different areas that we enable. So it's all different parts of the sector from other sectors, from common things like audio conferencing, like video conferencing that we're doing at the moment, things like mobile shopping, mobile health, which a lot of us are probably accessing at the moment as well, public transport, but also things like accommodation sharing. So Airbnb actually is one of the things which means that as many hotels have not had to be built because of accommodation sharing, better use of accommodation resources, smart building, smart energy, smart manufacture, smart agriculture. All of these things, mobile connectivity is helping make those sectors more efficient, and we expect to see that number rise in the coming years. So I think that's also important to call out, that the impact that we have is not just in reducing the emissions within our own sector, but also in other sectors as well, so that we can achieve reducing emissions in line with science across the economy. I mentioned before some resources that we've created. I think this is a really big area to help operators. The Climate Action Handbook, the climate policy on the right-hand side. We've also produced some climate FAQs. So I meant the graph at the beginning. So what are the energy use of the sector? What are carbon emissions? What's going to happen with 5G? does COVID-19, is it spread by 5G? So kind of addressing some of the slightly more outlandish things that have come out over the last few months. So those are also available on our website as a resource for operators and other stakeholders. We've actually created a climate action toolkit, which talks through how to disclose your carbon emissions, how to commit to a carbon reduction target, and how to calculate your target. And in particular, on the third section, we've created a guide for mobile operators to align their science-based target to the new industry pathway. It's a step-by-step guide, and it's really as straightforward as we can make it. Setting a science-based target is slightly complicated. I think everyone would agree, but we have created a guide that is as straightforward as possible, literally holding the hand of the operator from one step to the other to how to do the calculations and what they should focus on. And then probably one of the final things to mention is, okay, well, you want to set a target, but how are you actually going to reduce? So we have a number of case studies on our website explaining how to do that, whether it's on energy efficiency, renewable energy types, how to purchase renewable energy, but also how to reduce emissions in your supply chain as well. And we'll continue to work with the task force next year. So I've just put down a few projects that we're working on going into 2021. 5G is something that a lot of operators and also legislators are interested in. What's going to be the end use of 5G? So we're looking into that. AI for energy. We're also going to do a wrap up on the state of the industry on climate action, which will be produced in March. And then it's going to be all about COP26 next year. So we'll be working with operators to encourage even more of them to set science-based targets and net zero targets in advance of COP26. So hopefully that's just within time. Sorry, it's quite a lot of information to put across to you. But if you would like to find out more, it's all available on gsma.com/climate action, all of the resources that I mentioned. I hope you found me explaining that approach useful.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah, okay, so as you were speaking, I saw some of the questions coming in for you. So I'll just read it out for you. From Amar. So does GSMA have differentiated deadlines for telcos in emerging markets versus developed in reaching to net zero emissions? And to what extent is it conditional on the respective countries' renewable power plants availability?
Yeah, very good question. We are very aware that the situation is different in different countries around the world, and there is no requirement to set a science-based target to be part of the climate task force. So the climate task force is open to everyone, no matter what stage of development you're at with your climate journey. And you know, we say to operators, if you can't set a science-based target, then at least look at setting a carbon reduction target. And you might want to look at setting one aligned to your country's NDC. So that's your country's target that they submit to the Paris Agreement. And we think that's probably, you know, something that's likely to be achievable. And a big one is around the availability of renewable electricity, which is why it's a topic that we have started to, you know, we're starting to look to produce more guidance around, because that's been the feedback we've had from operators. We'd love to set an SBT, but we don't even have renewable energy markets in our country at the moment. So it's just not going to be possible. There's always a delicate balancing act around that, because also a renewable energy market will be created through demand for renewable energy in a country. So we want to encourage operators to set sort of quite challenging targets, but we also recognise that that can be quite difficult to get agreement from, especially from the leadership of your company, when you're basically saying we are putting money on there being a renewable energy market in the future, and there's no guarantee that there might be one. So it is a delicate balancing act.
Okay, thank you. And I have one question coming in privately for me. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So at what stage do you think GSMA is currently at in terms of its progress to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050?
Wow. Yeah, that is the question. We are really too early down the path to understand that at the moment. I did mention that we're looking to do the State of the Industry Climate Report in March, and that's really our first attempt to answer that question. It won't give us all the answers. I think it will probably be able to tell us more about targets across the industry rather than actual progress. But we have engaged with the CDP for the first time as an industry association this year to start to get an understanding of what the emissions are across the whole industry. So I very much hope we will continue to do that in the years ahead. And then we can start to actually get an answer to that question, because we'll have the numbers to say, you know, are the numbers going up? Are they going down? Are they level for the mobile industry? So that we can then adjust accordingly how we move towards net zero.
Okay, thank you. And there's one last question. So are there related targets around elimination of conflict materials and high intensity mining for raw materials for communications equipment?
Yes, I mean, very good question. It's not something that we have as part of the climate program, but we do have a wider sustainability program at the GSMA that looks at these issues, not only around conflict minerals, but also around human rights as well. So yes, colleagues of mine do focus on those areas. I don't have those targets to hand though, but more information can be found on our website on wider issues of sustainability.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So unfortunately, we have run out of time, and yeah, we do apologize that we have not managed to get through all of them, especially from the previous panelist session. So if your question hasn't been answered, we'll follow up on them after this session via email. So I'd like to say a big thank you to our panelists, speaker and moderator, Erwan, Raymond, Andrew, Flora, and Stephen for your sharing today. So I hope everyone has gained something from this webinar and are more inspired to adopt the science-based target within your respective organizations. So if you wish to have a better understanding on the science-based targets, how to set the targets, which other companies in your industry are taking actions, do visit the sciencebasedtargets.org. So we have one final session happening next week on the 10th of November 2020, focusing on science-based targets for financial institutions. So for those of you who are interested, we'll be resharing the registration link after this. And lastly, thank you everyone who has joined us today, and have a nice afternoon or evening ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.